Hello and welcome to my presentation on the history of Unix-like systems, where we take a dive into the past behind GNU Linux and the BSD systems. Um, let's start out by looking at the early history of these operating systems. First up, we have GNU Linux. This was announced by Richard Stallman in 1983 as a response to the increase in proprietary software in the early 1980s. Um, he believed he had to write GNU because of his principle that if one likes a program, one must be able to share it with another. He also wanted to make some improvements to the Unix-like system he was planning on making. He did not want it to be a carbon copy. Um, and these improvements would be based on his experience with previous Unix systems. So in 1989, Stallman was able to release the GNU software. However, it yet did not have a free kernel. Into the picture comes Linus Torvalds, who was writing a kernel for another operating system called Minix. This kernel would be reappropriated to GNU, and thus GNU Linux was created and then launched in December 1991. BSD, on the other hand, was created in 1978 in the University of California, Berkeley by Bill Joy. However, this initial project was not standalone. It was just merely a enhanced Unix project. From this, Net2BSD was created, the first attempt to make BSD without any Unix code. This was contested by AT&T's Unix System Laboratories, and thus Net2BSD was under legal trouble for a couple of years, under which no progress on the project was made. Um, Once this was cleared up, uh, from Net2BSD emerges NetBSD and FreeBSD. NetBSD was quite popular in its time due to its new internet features, while FreeBSD is even available today. Um, Theodore Roth was a lead developer at NetBSD, and he leaves NetBSD to found his own BSD project, OpenBSD, which is also available today. However, when he goes from NetBSD to OpenBSD to create his own project, um, he finds the GNU GPL license under which GNU Linux was released under to be too restrictive, and he creates his own license, the BSD license. Um, these BSD licenses and the GNU GPL licenses play a critical role in the adoption of these operating systems. So let's take a quick look into what these licenses are and what they offer. GNU GPL was created to be the opposite of the standard proprietary license, uh, meaning that proprietary programs could not be included in these programs. The GPL license also allowed for programs to be distributed, supported, and documented at a cost, but the software itself cannot be sold. On the other hand, the BSD license was way less restrictive, and it placed minimal restrictions on the code too, and thus allowed code to be either remain open source or become a fully completed commercial solution. Thus, different licenses attracted different end users. GNU GPL was commonly seen by researchers who did not plan on making proprietary versions in the future, and thus would you be used in research and development projects. Meanwhile, BSD is an excellent use if the end user desires to have minimal legal issues, if the projects will evolve over the future, or if it's a research project that aims to have a commercial use. Uh, let's move on to the notable updates over the years that these operating systems received. From 1991 to 1995, first up, Linux was released in 1991. In 1992, it was released under the GPL license, where it was open sourced. Um, Following the release of this, come Slackware, Red Hat, and Debian. Slackware was the first operating system to be released with the TCP/IP stack, along with the X Windows system that allowed for a GUI to be created. However, this distribution was very buggy, and Ian Murdoch's frustration with this gives rise to Debian in 1993, an operating system that is widely known due to its ports into Ubuntu and Raspbian on the Raspberry Pi. Um, we also have BSD, which was not released in 1993. However, it took until 1994 when it could be legally claimed free of AT&T Unix code. During this time, we would see features such as dynamic buffer caches, memory, uh, fail-safe probing devices for the ISA bus, IP multicast, kernel modules, file systems that can be loaded on demand, be introduced into the free BSD ecosystem. 1995 to 1999 was one of the most busiest years for the Linux distribution. We start with the Linux kernel being upgraded to 2.2, with support for symmetric multiprocessing, better memory management, and increased number of kernels that the processor can run on. This was something that the Red Hat OS takes advantage of with its multiple releases during this short period of time. With these releases, Red Hat feels confident to go public at the end of the decade, and in 1999, when it releases its IPO, which tripled that value by the end of the day, resulting in the eighth largest first day gain. Um, we also have OpenBSD, which was released in 1996 with the OpenSSH utility set. OpenSSH is the SSH utility set that's available in most Unix-like distribution systems and is widely used today, even when you're trying to upload your homework to school servers. Finally, we also see the introduction of the popular KDE and GNOME desktop environments. What this means is that before these environments were created, individual users would have to set up their own X-based environments and then create their GUI components on top of that. However, these desktop environments allowed individual users to bootstrap uh, off KDE and GNOME and have applications that worked on top of them instead. Uh, the years from 2000 to 2015 is where we see some of the most long-term and stable releases. Starting out, we have the Linux Foundation being created as a means of sponsoring the Linux kernel into the future, but also as a means to protect its values of freedom, collaboration, and education. Linux 2.4 is released. This has plenty of features such as USB PC cards being supported, ISA plug and play, Bluetooth, RAID, ext3. Later on, we would say minor additions such as physical address extension, improved 64-bit support, 16 TB file systems, and even ext4. All these kernel upgrades led to the development of a new operating system distro for GNU Linux, Ubuntu. Ubuntu, which was released in 2004, was a Debian-based operating system which aimed to create easy-to-use GNU Linux desktops that could be used by the end user with minimal experience in Linux. Uh, We also have OpenBSD, which was launched in the year of 2000, supported for 7 years. Um, it had features such as jails and KQ, which allowed FreeBSD to be one of the most reliable and highly performant operating systems that was enjoyed widely by system admins running it on their servers during the dot-com bubble of the 2000s. Later on to the decade, in 2008, we see one of the most popular Linux-based operating systems being released. Android 1.0 released in 2008 in the HTC Dream. How this initial release, even though it had a wide amount of features such as Gmail, Maps, YouTube, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, it was very buggy, and it would take until Android 1.5, codename Cupcake, to and for Android to be much more noticed and adapted into smartphones. We also see Linux 4.0 being released in 2015 with features such as live kernel patching, um, support for BetaFS, F2FS. Live kernel patching was enjoyed by system admins as it meant that they could now patch their servers without having to restart it. Now, let's take a moment to look at the proposed future changes. The current stable release of Linux is 5.7. It can support 64-bit ARM architecture. It has a ACPI power button to power virtual machines. However, and it also has a thermal pressure tracking that allows it to minimize thermal throttling and thus improved task scheduling. The scheduled Linux kernel 5.9, which is the bleeding edge, offers FSGS-based support, which allows applications to write directly to the FSGS registers, and NVMe 2.0 support that allows file systems performance to be really fast, something greatly enjoyed by servers. Um, we also have rescue mount features for BetaFS, and better kernel memory usage by better managing anonymous memory. FreeBSD also sees a release in 2021 where it hopes to support OpenEZFS, pooled storage, RAID Z, copy on write. It also plans to to replace GCC as its default compiler with Clang. This change should also allow for faster binary creation, something enjoyed by operating systems, and for developers to enjoy the better diagnostics provided by Clang. Finally, OpenBSD just celebrated its 25th birthday last October as it upgraded to version 6.8. Now it supports PowerPC 64, which is a popular 64-bit architecture used in automotive vehicles, and WireGuard VPN support, which is a new coming VPN protocol that aims to upsert both OpenVPN and IPsec in terms of both performance and reliance. In conclusion, uh, both these operating systems, starting out with a desire to be Unix-like, have turned into fully functional, fully fleshed out, completely stable operating systems. These operating systems no longer, like during the era of 1995 to 2000s, there aren't any more breaking changes. There aren't any more huge game-breaking changes. The operating systems have entered an era of stability. Uh, and the features among both operating systems seems to be quite similar. So end user choice in terms of features is quite a purely subjective manner. But however, something that needs to be kept in mind are the legal issues that comes with the licenses being used. For instance, if any of your applications use the Linux kernel, if it's statically linked to it, it also has to be GPL'd. So concerns like this needs to be kept in mind when choosing which Unix-like operating system you want to work for your next project on. In terms of popularity, the licensing, as I just talked about, was one of the biggest concerns when the entire operating system revolution started out. And GNU beating BSD long ago was something that BSD was never able to recover from. Um, GNU essentially had the GPL license, which more developers preferred, and fewer legal issues, which meant that development wasn't tied down by anything. And thus, this in turn created a more vibrant ecosystem, which in turn resulted in more users using it. So that is my presentation. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good break.